Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from different parts of the world. A very, very warm welcome to today's dialogue session. This is the second in the series of the Africa Sanitation Dialogues. We will pause briefly to allow more participants to join us before we get started. But as we wait, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, organization, and where you're joining us from. Yes, it's really wonderful to see so many participants logging in already. Thank you so much for making your time to be with us today. Once again, a very warm welcome to today's session. My name is Florence Lake from the International Water Association, and I'm delighted to introduce today's dialogue session titled Beyond Sewers, Empowering Utilities for Non-Sewered Sanitation Services. We'll move on to the next slide, and I will share a brief background about the Africa Sanitation Dialogues. The Africa Seawise Network, which was launched in 2022 at the IWA World Water Congress in Copenhagen, is a collaborative platform that brings together participants to advance inclusive urban sanitation across the African continent. And earlier this year, that is in February 2025, IWA and the Gates Foundation co-hosted the Africa Seawise Network meeting during the Africa Water and Sanitation Congress in Kampala, Uganda. And that session brought together actors from across Africa to align priorities and set the agenda for 2025. And one of the outcomes from this meeting was the endorsement of quarterly sanitation dialogues, which is an initiative aimed at enhancing advocacy, learning, and knowledge exchange on inclusive urban sanitation. And the Africa Sanitation Dialogues are a regional subset of this initiative and is coordinated by IWA as part of its leadership of the Africa Seawise Network to keep the network active and engaged throughout 2025. Two dialogues are planned for this year. The first one was held on the 25th of June, and it focused on catalyzing sanitation investments through innovative financing. It was a huge success, and with a strong demand for deeper dives from many of the participants who joined in. Today's session is organized in collaboration with Global Water Operators Partnership Alliance, that's GWOPA, and Water and Sanitation for Urban Populations, that's WASAP, and it's the second, focusing on empowering utilities, as already mentioned. In the next slide, I'll just share a few quick housekeeping notes. Please note that this dialogue is being recorded. Both the recording and presentation slides will be shared on the IWA Connect Plus platform, but on the IWA website. Speakers are kindly reminded to ensure permission for any copyrighted materials. Please note that the views shared during this dialogue are those of the speakers and not necessarily of IWA. Again, in the next slide, just to ensure your active engagement in today's session, we invite the participants to please use the chat box to share your thoughts and interact with fellow attendees throughout the session. And you're also welcome to use the Q&A box to submit any questions for our panelists throughout the discussions. Please note that the microphones are muted for all participants and will not be using the raise hand feature in this dialogue. So please kindly use the chat box and the Q&A box. So let me quickly introduce our distinguished speakers as well as the moderators. So this session has two moderators because we have two segments, as I'll share in a couple of slides. Today's panel brings together leaders from ministries, development partners, utilities, regulators, research institutions, and community organizations, each bringing very unique perspectives on defining and operationalizing the mandate for non-sewered sanitation. And therefore, their contributions today will help us to unpack policy, technical and practical dimensions of this important topic. And the next slide, I'll quickly take you through the session agenda. Here's how the session will flow. We'll begin with a short welcome and quick poll, and then move into part one of the dialogue, which is defining the mandate for non-sewered sanitation. And then part two, which is operationalizing the mandate. And for each of these segments, we'll have a framing presentation and as well as interactive panel discussion with Q&A. And then we'll close with a synthesis of key messages. And so to set the stage, we are honored today to hear to have welcome remarks from Cecilia Anderson, who is the chief of the Urban Basic Services section at UN Habitat, and her remarks will provide valuable context to today's discussion. You're most welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you so much, Florence. I hope that I've managed to unmute myself as well. Yes, excellent. No, thank you, everybody. And it's really a great pleasure to welcome you all to this International Water Association's second African Sanitation Dialogue, which is being led today by the Global Water Operators Partnership Alliance at UN Habitat and the Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor. Utilities, as you all know, are recognized in the New Urban Agenda by the UN's member states as key agents in achieving sustainable urban development. But specifically, it's the paragraph 34, which commits to equitable and affordable access to sustainable basic physical and social infrastructure for all. And that includes water and sanitation. And then, of course, it's the paragraph 120, which calls for equipping public water and sanitation utilities with the capacity to implement sustainable water management systems and to progressively eliminate inequalities in access. So the New Urban Agenda is implemented through UN Habitat's mandate, which places water and sanitation utilities really at the heart of its new strategy. We have a new strategy that's going to guide us until 2029. And this strategy puts sanitation utilities right at the heart alongside other basic services and links it really with housing. So with the majority of Africa's population dependent on on-site sanitation services, it's critical to address how utilities can provide inclusive public services to the entire population, leaving no one behind. So UN Habitat, through its citywide inclusive sanitation program, supports national and subnational governments in, for example, Kenya and Nepal, to integrate what we call CWISE principles into urban policies and sanitation programming. Just to mention that the Global Report on Sanitation and Wastewater Management in Cities and Human Settlements, which was published in 2023, not only gives a global outlook on how sanitation and wastewater management is done globally, but also provides some clarity about what actions to prioritize and why to prioritize those actions. So the Global Water Operators Partnership Alliance, which is hosted by UN Habitat, has developed a sanitation strategy that incorporates peer learning partnership. So peer learning in partnerships, which we call the Sanitation Operators Partnerships, so SWOPs for short. And those SWOPs actually look at the multi-actor partnerships, which include non-sewered sanitation by including utilities, private emptiers, regulators, and city authorities. So from Kenya to Senegal, the goal really remains one. It's about providing equitable and safely managed sanitation services for all. And UN Habitat is committed to adequate housing and, through its strategic plan, equipping utilities with the capacities and enabling environment that puts sanitation at the center of urban planning. And we will display, and maybe now taking the opportunity, I'd really love to invite you all to the Global Water Operators Partnership Alliance Congress. And the Congress is going to be taking place at the end of October from the 27th to the 30th in Bonn, Germany. And we'd love to welcome you all there. And with that, I'll hand back to Florence, and very much looking forward to the dialogue today.
Right. Thank you so much, Cecilia. And so before we dive in into the panel discussions, let's hear from you, our attendees. So to kick things off, we'll run a quick poll, which will be moderated by Sam Drabo from WhatsApp. And I'll hand over to you, Sam. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you, Florence, and hi, everyone. So my role here is really to introduce some of the key themes that are going to run through this session and to hear from you on your perspective on those themes. And we'll see if that evolves as we move through. So I'm going to ask 3 questions, and we're going to move through these quickly because we just have 5 minutes for this segment. So this is the first question. According to JMP, and there is a new JMP report now out, which many of you will be aware of. What proportion of Sub-Saharan Africans' population relies on non-sewered sanitation systems currently? And we have three options: 74%, A; B, 79%; C, 84%. Question two, and I'll talk through these in turn, and then we'll launch the results. Which of these mandate structures for urban sanitation is the most common globally? So here, this is drawing on a global mapping that has been conducted, looking at who has responsibility for non-sewered sanitation. And that research has found a typology of five broad mandate structures. So responsibility for sewered and non-sewered sanitation might be integrated with a national utility. They might be integrated, but with a subnational utility. When I say integrated, I mean they are with the same institution. Those mandates might be integrated, but with a local government. They might be split, so different institutions with responsibility for sewered sanitation and non-sewered. That might be with a utility, national level, and local government, or they might be split subnational utility and local government. So that question maybe bears a bit more reflection, but which of those structures do you think is the most common currently globally? And then finally, question three, a utility with responsibility for non-sewered sanitation. Now, this is a simple true or false question. So do you think this statement is true or false? A utility with responsibility for non-sewered sanitation, that is the mandate holder, is required to directly provide these services within their service area. Do you think that's true or false? So I hope that's enough time to absorb. This is really rapid fire just to get your initial impressions. So can we launch the results? Okay, so question one. Fairly even split, 39% of you opting for 84%, but 33% for option A, 28% for option B. I am not going to give the answer to that. You're going to need to pay attention because that answer is going to come up in one of the presentations to follow. The second question, which of these mandate structures is the most common globally? Now, 50% of you have said option E. Mandates are split between a subnational utility and local government, with local government being responsible for non-sewered sanitation. So that is a common arrangement, particularly in Africa. But the most common arrangement still currently is for responsibilities actually to be integrated with local government, option C. That is the case globally and also across Africa. It's very rare still for utilities to have integrated responsibility, but that is changing. And that's what this session is trying to highlight. A number of countries across Eastern and Southern Africa in particular taking on that shared responsibility. And there's an advocacy component for this session because we really feel there's a strong case for more utilities to be taking that responsibility. And of course, the global data, you need to bear in mind that in many cities and countries, there may not be a utility. So that's an important contextual factor. And finally, a utility with responsibility for non-sewered sanitation is required to directly provide these services within this service area. That statement, it's a bit of a trick statement, but that is false. A utility being responsible for non-sewered sanitation is not the same thing as having to directly provide services. And the emphasis there is on directly. And that's something you'll hear as we move through, particularly in the second part of this session, utilities operationalizing their mandate. They are often, in fact, in most cases, doing that through the private sector. So utilities need to have clear responsibility and accountability for coordinating services, but often that will be actually delivered in partnership with the private sector. And we'll say more about what that involves. Okay, I hope I haven't gone on too long, but I hope that provides some useful context. Back to you. Actually, not back to Florence, because I'm going to introduce now Shabana as we move into the first segment of this discussion. So Shabana Srinivasan is a program manager, management officer at GWOPA, where she supports global initiatives to strengthen water and sanitation operators through partnerships. And prior to that, she worked in global sanitation knowledge management, leading work with Susanna, which many of you will be aware of. So over to you, Shabana.
Thanks a lot, Sam. So we're going to begin the first part of the discussion today. And this session is looking at defining the mandate for non-sewered sanitation. And as a part of the discussion, we would have first a framing presentation by Hezekiah Pire from UN Habitat, and I'm happy to introduce him to you today. Hezekiah Pire leads the water and sanitation team at UN Habitat, which I'm also a part of, and has over 25 years of experience in governance, policy, institutional development, and citizen engagement. He manages multiple UN Habitat water and sanitation projects across Africa and Asia, and brings extensive expertise in strategy design, implementation, and multi-stakeholder engagement. So over to you, Pire, to give us a presentation on the status of sanitation management and mandates for non-sewered sanitation in Africa.
Thank you very much, Shobana, and I am glad to be part of this dialogue. To start us off, there are two important observations that I wanted to make about non-sewered sanitation. One is the fact that non-sewered sanitation is not an inferior service. It's not temporary or second-class solution that is waiting to transition into sewerage services. I think this is very important when we consider this dialogue on a continent where many people are looking at sewerage services as the ultimate service. The other important point that I want to make is that non-sewered sanitation is the dominant form of sanitation in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is very important because we need to really look at then how utilities carry out the mandate for service provision on non-sewered sanitation. So according to the latest JMP report that was released last month, the report paints a very positive picture of the status of sanitation management in Sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, there is, according to the report, a 12 percentage point increase from 42% in 2015 when the MDG started to now 54% in 2024. This actually represents a very substantial progress in sanitation infrastructure, service delivery, and also policy implementation on the continent. But one more important thing to still think about is that 46% of the population still lack access to safely managed sanitation in Sub-Saharan Africa, highlighting the need for accelerated efforts to meet SDG 6.2 by 2030. To frame our discussion today, the first part of the dialogue on defining the mandate for non-sewered sanitation, I want to focus on four important policy frameworks and trends in the region that really places non-sewered sanitation within the radar of utilities, and therefore the question of the preparedness of utilities in providing this service. The first one is the mandates and policy frameworks. And apart from the Africa Water Vision 2025, which is now currently under review, the Sharm el-Sheikh commitments of 2008, and the Africa Union Agenda 2063, which all recognize the critical role of sanitation in driving socioeconomic and environmental development on the continent. The most explicit commitment for sanitation on the continent was the Ngor Declaration of 2015 that happened in Dakar, Senegal, and now the AMCAO's African Sanitation Policy Guidelines of 2021, which guides African governments on how to review, how to revise, and how to develop their own sanitation policies, as well as the implementation strategy for those policies. The other important trend to look at is these shifting utility mandates and institutional shifts on the continent. We are making incremental progress with sanitation management on the continent, especially in the clarification of the roles and responsibilities for sanitation, the inclusion of various stakeholders in the sector, including private sector in the provision ecosystem, and also recognizing and integrating non-sewered sanitation into utility mandates. In fact, there is a study by Dev Afrique across 10 countries that found that most utilities still do not have the capacity to track non-sewered sanitation services. So I think this is a discussion that is very, very timely. And the big questions to ask really are utilities in the region equipped then to manage non-sewered sanitation at scale? The next point that I want to make is on regulation and governance. And I know that part of this will also be mentioned in the second part of this discussion. There's a regional momentum in recognizing regulation and governance of non-sewered sanitation as essential for ensuring affordability of services, particularly for low-income households, and also setting minimum service standards and licensing and monitoring for compliance. And I want to recognize the efforts of regional organizations such as ESAWAS, AFWASA, IWA, which is a global body, and AMCAO in actively promoting regulatory reform on the continent. The last point which I want to make really, and where a lot of effort still remains to be done, is in the integration of non-sewered sanitation in housing, especially in informal settlements. Although a lot of effort is already taking place to look at the holistic nature of sanitation and the cross-sectoral nature of non-sewered sanitation itself, housing policies and planning systems on the continent still do not embrace non-sewered sanitation. And it is worth noting that principles such as the citywide inclusive sanitation framework are now encouraging the planning of sanitation systems alongside housing, especially in informal settlements and low-income countries. And the question to ask really is, are we making a dent in integrating non-sewered sanitation into housing and slum upgrading programs? And these are the issues that will then be addressed by the upcoming panel. Thank you very much, Shubhana.
Thanks a lot, Pire. Thank you for highlighting that non-sewered sanitation is a concrete solution for Africa and not just a transition. And with this presentation, I would like the audience to note that you can put your questions for Pire on the chat, and we'll answer them later during the panel discussion. And in the interest of time, I would like to quickly move to the panel discussion today on defining the mandate. And we have very interesting panelists here. And I'd like to introduce all of them and request them to switch on their video and maybe wave to the audience once I have read your profile. So first we have Joshua Maviti from UN Habitat. Joshua is a seasoned professional in the field of urban development and environment policy and currently serving as a project manager at UN Habitat with extensive experience in socio-economic data analysis and regional program advisement. Joshua has had key roles at UN Habitat, including social economic data analyst for Central Riyadh, social and economic regeneration strategy, and Africa Regional Program Advisor for the Participatory Slum Upgrading Program. So hello, Joshua, please switch on your video. And next we have Engineer Felix Twino Mukunzi, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, is the Assistant Commissioner for Urban Water and Sewerage Services Department, Ministry of Water and Environment, Uganda. And he has over 20 years of experience in overseeing planning, design, construction, and supervision of sanitation infrastructure in the country, while also providing policy guidelines and guidance and support to the local governments. We're very happy to have you here as well. Next, we have Kichinme Bava, who's the Executive Secretary of the Pan-African Association of Sanitation Actors, PASA. and a managing partner at MetLab International, a sanitation system strengthening firm. Kitch is a geologist and an international development expert, and he has pioneered AMCO's sanitation department from 2013 to 22, leading Africa San conferences, the INGOR commitment and the advancements to it, monitoring systems, and the Africa Sanitation Policy Guidelines. He has also advanced sanitation systems across Africa in close collaboration with the African Union. We're very happy to have you here today, Kitch. And last but not the least, we have Yira Conte from Sierra Leone, and he is the national chairperson of the Federation of Urban and Rural Poor, FEDRUP, in Sierra Leone. He lives in Dworzak, which is Freetown's largest slum settlement, and he's a strong voice for the slum dwellers and the disabled community. He has been with FEDRUP for over 15 years, advocating for improved living conditions, basic services, and inclusion of the urban and rural poor. And he also works with projects like 80-20-30 and works on community-led solutions in informal settlements, including water, sanitation, and energy access. So welcome, Ira. Now over to the panel and the dialogue itself. So I will start with Joshua. If you're here with me, Joshua.
Yes.
We'd like to get to the core of the problem, of sanitation crisis, which is housing. Housing, land tenure, and basic services, they're all very deeply interconnected, and especially in the case of informal settlements, which we see that African cities are growing rapidly, and so is informal housing. So what do you think are the biggest challenges affecting efforts to integrate formal sanitation services, where settlements are involved in informal housing production? And could you share some examples from governments in Africa where they have implemented and designed land and housing programs that integrate, basic services and particularly sanitation?
Yes. Thank you, Shobana, and good morning, good afternoon, colleagues and participants in this dialogue. The question is quite interesting because when we look at adequate housing, for the position we describe adequate housing, the services, which is sanitation and other water and energy, kind are part and parcel of what you define as adequate housing. So in that context, they should not be divorced. We should not have a situation whereby there is a policy for housing or a program which is housing and the sanitation or other services come as an add-on. But having said that, we look at basically forming, just kind of zeroing in on how in Africa, especially with the rapid urbanization, housing is being delivered. Housing is actually delivered very much informally, incremental, self-built. And then you find that the governmental led programs for mass housing, they are they are mostly the less part of the solution in delivery of housing. And so the issue remains here. How then do you connect this informal housing and ensure that there is adequate sanitation, which is standardized, to kind of also give the results which is supposed to do? I mean, kind of like achieve the results supposed to have. And some of the barriers we have kind of seen, because there are quite a number of them and also very context specific, but generally there is an issue in informality of land tenure and ownership status. And this means that not only are we able to deal with specific site plots, but when you come to the agglomeration of a settlement, you find that we don't have any space which we could say it is communal space or public space, for which if we wanted to do the formal systems, and in fact, today we are talking about non-sewered system, but if you want even to do the sewered system, or that non-sewered system, which means we have to kind of have some public system, there's no land available. So investments will not be able to go to situations whereby there's no security of tenure, and this investment could also be, infrastructure could also be uprooted at any particular time when there may be the settlements are not permanent. The other issue is the way also the settlements appear often. Some of the housing actually is quite durable, built with good materials, well designed, but the lack of planning means that it's not cost efficient to lay infrastructure for sanitation. The third factor is, of course, the costs, what we need to do, because at the end of the day, some of the costs will be passed to the households. Are they able to afford the minimum cost for connection or the minimum cost for the standardized non-sewered system? This is also something which it's also related to amount of data available to be able to understand what is the affordability level for these kind of systems. And of course, there is also a big issue with the coordination mechanism. And here is why I'll be stopping for this first question, is because we have housing often as linked to urban development. So you find that housing departments would be linked to urban development. You have sanitation and water in another department or another ministry, and different budgets, different strategies, different plans. And to kind of bring these together with the issue of land access and also security of tenure, it's a tall order in most of the cases. It needs very robust coordination of housing programs to be able to kind of deliver this situation.
Thanks, Joshua, for highlighting that integrated planning is the key, and also cost as a big factor. Now I'll move over to the Ugandan ministry represented by Felix. I would like to ask Felix that, many African countries lack clear frameworks on defining who is responsible, institutionally for non-sewered sanitation. Based on Uganda's experience, what do you think needs to be done institutionally so that the local government, utilities, private sector join forces to provide non-sewered sanitation services? Over to you, Felix, and I appreciate if you could keep your response within 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be sure of that. Thank you very much, Shoban, for that question. And in response, of course, we start off from, we link to what Joshua has just talked about, and what Pire also talked about earlier. An opinion, sanitation, non-sewer sanitation is really beginning to get specific attention within urban setting within Africa. When you look at all policy documents, everything was pointing towards sewer sanitation. But now we are giving more attention to this non-sewered sanitation. And from our opinion from Uganda, it starts with a guiding sanitation policy. The current ASPG guidelines, provide revising sanitation policies for all countries that give clear roles within for the non-sewered sanitation. So if you look at the old policies that we've been having, when you took urban areas, they all talk about sewer sanitation, which has not been the case. So if the sanitation policy for the country can be improved, streamlined to give more focus on the non-sewer sanitation, then that is the beginning point. Then you know which ministry is in charge of what the Ministry of Health is doing, what the Ministry of Water and Environment is doing. For us in Uganda, Ministry of Water is the one that supervises the water utilities. So the utilities sign performance contracts with the Ministry of Water. So if the role is not clarified at the ministry level, then you will also have challenges in downstreaming these responsibilities, the utility organization. So if we are clear with the ministries, then we're able to instill to the utility for action. Of course, the municipalities and the private sector have a key role to play in these aspects. It's a coordinated responsibility, as we mentioned. We know the sanitation chain is a long chain from the household up to emptying. So all these guidelines that have been set at the national level have been handed down. It's the municipalities that are responsible for the enforcement, and they are constantly on the ground and working with the people and working with the households. So we look forward to you. We work with the municipalities. They've developed guidelines. They've developed bylaws, and they are the enforcers of all the guidelines that have been developed at different levels. And the private sector has a role to play, which we see largely on the emptying and transportation aspects. In Uganda, especially in Kampala, in the capital city, you have several private sector players who have bought these emptying trucks, and they're doing them themselves. And the government is only coming in to provide a platform for coordinating and improving safety standards in these areas. And as Andrew mentioned, the utilities are not really providing these services, for example, emptying, but they are giving platform where this private sector can play in. So it's a coordinated responsibility between the central government, the ministry levels, the municipalities, and the utilities working together to support the households, and the communities also do their part on make sure that they're having facilities that meet the minimum standards. And with this coordination, we can be able, I think, to take the non-sanitation forward. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Felix. I think you've highlighted really important points here. First is clear sanitation policy, and then localized solutions where municipality takes clearly the enforcement on ground. Now, going to decentralization and then people, I would like to invite Gira from FEDRUP to talk about informal settlements. And we know that informal settlements are mostly affected by inadequate sanitation, and their voices and lived experiences are often missing from policies and planning in many countries. So we know that Slum Dwellers International, FEDRUP, organizations like this are working very closely with communities and documenting what are the most important needs. So we would like you to answer what are the sanitation needs of informal settlements that are often overlooked, and how can we overcome this? Yeah. Over to you, Gira.
Thank you very much. I think I want to thank the two presenters, Joshua and Felix, which has already explained some of the interconnected issues around relating to what is happening and what is not happening. Especially, it is contrary to our work in our countries that varies, because if you look at sanitations for informal settlements, it has been purely excluded. You know, when they move to this global world in making this world reports, all governments are responsible to say something. In fact, they will say something that thinks it's happening in reality, except you move to the ground and then you see that what they are presenting is far different from what is the reality on the ground. I've been in these informal settlements since my youth age, over 40 years now. I've seen the reality, government over government. But just want to mention something, that who is responsible. Felix also come up with the idea that it has also intertwined into a particular one. So we know the responsibility as people that went to school and understand things, that when it comes in terms of sanitations, the municipality has the responsibility to do short works. But it is very, very difficult for you to see the central government devolving those functions to these local governments to make sure they do exactly what they want to do from informal settlements. So when you look at what I really presented, is not about we in informal settlement don't want the development. Is about how are we connected? How are we involved? What are the principles, or what are the things that makes us not to be involved or not to be seen in no particular? So when you look at what we've seen, it's lack of land tenure. We living in an informal settlement, there are reasons why we are there. If you look at the war that we have for the past 11 years, everything was centralized in the city. So everybody after the war is looking for a better place to stay. And the city is so small that not everybody can be into the city, but those that force themselves into the city has to look for a place to stay. It can be up the hill, cutting down trees. It can be down to the seafronts, banking and claiming land. So for us to have the land tenure is very difficult. And 80% of the informal settlements in Freetown don't have a land tenure. If you look at the poor infrastructure, because we want a place to sleep, we really want to live in the city for a better education, better health, better life. We have 90% of our infrastructures are not in place. The place is not planned. We don't know the kind of houses we are building. All we want to know is to have a shelter that we can dwell in, so we can run after our achievements or goals. If you look at the topography of the land which I just mentioned, those that are living at the hillside have their own problems as informal settlements. Like the community where I am, this morning, you have to wake up 2 a.m. in the morning to fetch for water. 2 a.m. in the morning. So fetching water with you, the children and the wife, make sure you have the water before everybody's ready to bath or to take bath, to make sure to go to school, they go to work, and to go to markets. So it's very, very, because of the topography of the environment we have in our communities, it's also a problem for us. The reason for all this is because we are not included in the budget of government in terms of development. We are always being excluded. We are only involved when it comes in terms of elections, which they will come up with a lot of promises. And you have nothing to say, you have nothing to do. It's your right to vote, it's your right to say, but it's not your right for you to have the required facilities you need to add. The other thing that is a problem, which just one mentioned, Felix. If you go to informal settlement, we have a shared toilet. Open defecations is also there. The shared toilets, we call them pour flush, we call them hanging toilets. This hanging toilet is a shared toilet. The person that has the opportunity to build can build that toilet, but it can be shared to the entire houses around. And then you see that it also gives us a proper, clear definition that the illness, sanitation problem of health is also within our communities. Many households do share toilets, and the hygiene is a problem for us. Safety issue is a problem for us. And then you look to limited funding, which government normally sees. I've been to so many conventions, so many treaties that governments are signing on behalf of their people, receiving funds from World Bank and all other institutions in the name of improving the informal settlements, which our slogan says, take the slum from the people and not the people from the slum. And indications for us to take the slum from the people is when you go there with infrastructures, you go there with proper planning, include those people to come up with their ideas, which we are also doing our mapping, profiling, just to show them the problem we have in the community, so they will not spend money in doing all those research, because we already have those answers for them, so they can just come and do implementations. But what they will tell us, they will say limited funding, and we've been suffered. 85% of us have been suffered on limited funding, not enough money to extend formal sanitation to these areas. That's what they will say. The money we call for is for certain areas, is for this, is for that. Except our dynamic mayor that we have now, which is Yvonne Akisoya, which has stand tall to make sure that we can't have 100% of what we are asking for, but it has increased the efforts of toilet in communities, also decreased open defecations in communities. The reason is because for all the 11 pillars they have in the municipality, some communities are involved in participating to see what the problems are and how can we share this particular one. So for her, she has limited funding in the municipality to execute all these duties that is the responsibility of central government in the African context. Lack of policy and support. Felix have said it. You know, it is very real that the policies is there, and the support to implement this policy is not there. They will just create the policy and put how somebody in an informal settlement don't even go to school, don't even know how to read and write. These policies have been in their offices, not been explained to people, to communities. That's why we told them, if you involve with the informal settlers to be part and parcel of your work they are doing, we can disseminate this message into that part. But the critical thing is when you go into some of these meetings, you said you are from the informal settlement. You have been inferior, you have been classed as somebody, you know, they'll be looking at you as if you're a different person. So with all these problems, we the informal settlements are really suffering from a lot of problems, except we come up with our own idea. If you look at the picture, look at pipes, waterborne pipe that we want to connect. Look how we connect it. Look at the toilet. These are pour flush toilet that is going right into the sea. Look at the road to enter the city. And these people are contributing a lot in the development or the income or the money, revenue to central government. But we are not having this back. So thank you very much for that particular presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Shira. I think you've highlighted a lot of things like sanitation services directly connected to land tenure and how important it is to decentralize services to ensure that policy turns into practice. So these are very important points you're raising. I The next question I would like to focus is on, private sector. We've been hearing a lot from all of the panelists. And so over to Kitch representing PASA. We know that universal sanitation, access to sanitation, especially in African countries, is difficult with financing gaps, and private sector has to step in a lot of cases. Local providers are very key, the small and medium-sized private enterprises. They deliver essential services, but somehow they're still not linked to utilities, or their linkage is fragmented.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me first of all start by acknowledging my brother Pire for underscoring the fact that non-sewered sanitation is not a service that is on the ladder where we transition to get to sewerage coverage. And based on that pronouncement, and I would like to underscore that we need to look at the sanitation ladder again. For me, I think that would be one of the key takeaways from this meeting in terms of what he said and what it implies to us on the continent. And I'm saying this because PASA, as you may know, is a startup of about 5 years now. And if you look at the sanitation service chain there, from containment to treatment and subsequent reuse or disposal, you find our members there all over in about 31 countries. But the services that private sector operators provide is all over the continent in all the 54 member states. So within this service chain is where people create value, and they make their profit, and they do their businesses. And it's open for many, is a big market to be explored. So PASA is a network of of people who provide these services across the continent. And like I said, it's in 31 countries. And the vision is to become a leading association of service providers that provide safely managed sanitation services. And this is through the capacitation of the members of PASA. So if you look at my one slide, it gives you the process flow for how PASA operationalizes itself at private sector organization level up to the national association and the continental platform. So first of all is the coalition of sanitationpreneurs, where the different sanipreneurs come together and agree to form an association. Now, the value in becoming a network and a platform is that it gives more voice. It gives them access to resources like credit. It helps them to share knowledge, and also it helps them to improve their services. So after they coalesce, then they form the association and become formalized. But one of the prerequisites for becoming a national association is that there is a caveat that government must recognize the national association. And this recognition comes at the highest level in terms of the ministry, the key policy coordination entity, but also by different actors like regulators, like utilities that provide water and sanitation services. And this leads to partnership formulation, because PASA on its own, indeed, the end game, one of the end games of coming together and becoming a platform is to be able to have the voice and the capacity to be a partner to be a partner with the key service delivery government entities. And we all know that most of the utilities, either they have the mandate but lack the capacity to provide sanitation services and therefore focus only on water supply services, or they do not have the mandate at all for sanitation service provision. So they focus only on what they know how to do best. We've been approached in several countries where the utility is set up to provide water services, and they have approached us to say, you guys have the, that is the National Association of PASA. You guys have the capacity to deliver sanitation services. We would like for you to work with you as a utility also and with the municipality to see that you build the capacity of our members so that we can share the service provision in terms of a partnership, public-private partnership for improved services. And if you look at the public-private partnerships that we go into across the continent, several examples abound. We have models in Cote d'Ivoire where PASA was based, and you will recall that PASA just moved to its secretariat in Senegal. We have a very workable example also in Senegal, where the partnership between private operators and utilities improves the entire service delivery chain, from containment to even the operation and management of the fecal sludge treatment plants and subsequent reuse and disposal. And in Cameroon, we also have a public-private partnership with the utility for build, operate, and manage, where our members manage the treatment plant. And also in Ethiopia, there was also a situation where we realized that the service provision is done simultaneously by the utility and the private sector. Whereas the utility owns the infrastructure in terms of the trucks, in terms of the equipment and the treatment infrastructure, they do not have the capacity. And on the other hand, the PASA members have the capacity but do not have the equipment and some of the tools and the infrastructure. So we were able to facilitate that kind of partnership to ensure that there is the private sector comes in with its capacity and manages and uses the tools and infrastructure of the utility to provide the services. And before I end, I want to say that we want to actively replicate these models that work across the continent, so that, because we feel that is the future. And through that, we have the One City, One FSTP initiative of PASA, which is not really in terms of each city having one fecal sludge treatment plan, but each city, through the utility and the municipality, is able to work together with other stakeholders to ensure that there are treatment facilities, not centralized, but decentralized across the cities, and they are taken into account, and that partnership helps to ensure that there is no open dumping of fecal sludge. So I think that partnership is very key, and it's the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kitch. I think you're doing a really important job of collecting all the private sector players and putting them into formalized association and connecting them to governments. So, and also explaining all these beautiful PPP models that have been successful in countries. I think this is what we need to replicate, and we hope that PASA is going to help having this replicated in other African countries as well. Now, in the interest of time, we have a lot of interesting questions, but we have to move to the next session. So I kindly request all the panelists to answer the questions on the chat. There are a lot of questions on financing as well. For that, you would have to refer to the first dialogue on financing. And now we'll move on to the second session. And I would like to hand over to Alan, who's going to be moderating the second session with utilities themselves. And Alan is a senior urban sanitation and CY specialist at the CY's Technical Hub in Senegal. And he was previously the program manager in the Directorate of Public Health and Environment at KCCA, Kampala Capital City Authority, where he led CY's program to reduce public health at the core of the problem we're dealing with. So over to you, Alan, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Shobana, for that warm welcome and introduction. A warm welcome to you all to this second segment of this dialogue on now operationalizing the mandates for non-sewered sanitation. And as introduced earlier, we'll start with a context-setting presentation that will give an overview of what the utilities responsibility for NSS looks like in practice. And to do that, we will have Sam Drapo from WhatsApp in the UK, whom I'm very happy to introduce. Sam leads the evaluation, research, and learning function at the Water and Sanitation for Urban Populations, that's WhatsApp in full, where he's rolled out research into policy programs across WhatsApp 6 program countries in Africa and Asia, and authored or edited over 60 WhatsApp technical publications. Sam, over to you.
Great, thank you, Alan. So I'm going to move through this content very quickly. I just have 5 minutes, but we will share the slides. But the aim here is just to provide a foundation for this second part of the session, looking at what is involved for utilities in operationalizing their mandate for non-sewered sanitation. Next slide, please. So we've heard already in this session, but just bears further reflection that there is a really significant shift now taking place, particularly in Eastern and Southern Africa, countries such as Kenya, Zambia, Tanzania, Rwanda, all to differing degrees, now looking to place responsibility for non-sewered sanitation with utilities. And that approach is recommended in the African Sanitation Policy Guidelines. It's also supported by recent research led by SOAS that has outlined increasing support at different levels for this approach. Next. Now, why is that support increasing? It's because there are very strong logical arguments for placing non-sewered sanitation with the utility where there is a utility. And this is a nuanced discussion, and I'm really summarizing the top line here. But the reasons for that include that it can mitigate the risk of disproportionate resources being allocated to sewered, not enough attention paid to non-sewered. It can support clarity of public understanding on who is responsible if those responsibilities are integrated. It can support a customer-oriented mindset, which we know is required to deliver non-sewered sanitation, aspects such as building demand. It enables fecal sludge treatment to be combined with often existing utility responsibility for wastewater treatment. It can support regulation because regulators often have more leverage over utilities than they do over local governments, and it facilitates cross subsidies really importantly, including from sewer to non-sewered sanitation. Now, here I'm presenting a preview of forthcoming, and I emphasize draft guidance that is being developed by SOAS and by WhatsApp, looking at what is involved in supporting utilities to take on non-sewered sanitation. So that begins with stakeholder engagement. Of course, this is a major sector level reform that we're talking about, and it needs stakeholder coordination. Next. It needs changes at the policy and legislative levels, as has already happened in several countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, and regulatory reform. There is a really significant piece here around institutional behaviour change within utilities, as well as of other actors in the sector. And within utilities, that may also involve changes to utility structures, like setting up new FSM units. The service delivery model needs to be defined and strategic plans developed for non-sewered sanitation, including the extent to which the private sector will be engaged and how. And then all of these functions need to be considered. So containment, a critical aspect, or usually not placed or very rarely placed with the utility. But to deliver this responsibility, utilities will need to engage with local governments around containment. They'll need to build systems, human resources, of course, financing, private sector engagement, transfer and treatment infrastructure. So now I'm going to skip through some of the more detailed guidance on how to support utilities with this really transformational shift, beginning with organizational structures. So dedicated departments may be needed that can increase the visibility and the status of non-sewered sanitation, facilitate access to funding, overcome potentially behavioural barriers within the utility. And you'll hear from Priscilla at Mawasco shortly, for example, as an example of a utility that has taken that step. Specialised roles may be required, and operational staff across the utility need to be engaged with this process. Strategic plans and business models are really at the heart of this, including the extent of private sector engagement. And here there are really three main models. The utility might deliver fecal sludge management services directly. Currently, that is unusual. They're more likely to be contracting the private sector, or adopting, in a sense, an arm's length regulatory role by permitting and licensing. A market assessment, of course, needs to underpin that choice, but the aim here is to strengthen, extend services, but not to cause undue disruption to the existing market. And you see on the right here some of the roles that the utility may need to play across the service chain. And if we can skip through, but the key point really is around emptying and transport. Which of these models is appropriate in which context, and in terms of contracting, that might involve service contracts, delegated management, leasing, or concession arrangements. We'll hear an example from Pride at Lusaka Water on the latter option next. Then there is the really complex question of involving the private sector, but also the informal sector. So to deliver non-sewered sanitation in practice, utilities will have to engage with the informal sector. Of course, they'll be supported by national regulators in that, but we're talking here around the progressive formalisation of pit emptying services, transitioning from informal to formal under a regulated framework. So those informal emptiers often will be providing services across the city. They need to be engaged. What is the utility's role within that? This is a question that we'll be providing guidance on, and a responsive mode of building compliance is recommended in terms of the regulatory approach. Next. And finally, financing, and we'll hear from Richard Cheriot at WASWEB, who have introduced a sanitation development fee. Of course, there is so much to say here, but the first step is to include non-sewered sanitation within the utility strategic plan, develop a sanitation business model. There are many financing sources that are going to be needed to be leveraged. Those will include tariffs, cross subsidies from water supply. You see a snapshot of a bill by ADRM in Maputo, where sanitation tariff has recently been introduced. Tipping fees potentially, although that is a nuanced discussion. Revenue from waste products, commercial finance, grant funding, all of these may have a role. So I hope that gives a sense of everything that is involved. This is a big shift utilities are being asked to take on. There are really strong reasons for it, but they need to be supported. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Sam, for framing that segment, our next session very well, and for highlighting the opportunities or the case for integrating sewered and non-sewered sanitations with services with utilities, especially the regulatory and financing aspects are some of the things that I've picked out. So we'll now hear some reflections from what this means in practice. And we have a very great panel with us that is going to share with us how they've gone about operationalizing non-sewered sanitation within their organizations. And I'll introduce them first. So when I introduce you, please switch on your camera, wave, and we'll take it from there. So firstly, we have Priscilla Oloch, who is with Malindi Water and Storage Company. She's been there for some time now, where she has led the development and implementation of Malindi's citywide inclusive sanitation plan. She has championed stakeholder coordination and driven progress towards Malindi's aspiration of achieving universal access to sanitation services. Priscilla, you're most welcome to this panel. You can wave if you can. The second panelist is Pride Kafwempe. Pride is a sanitation expert with over a decade of experience in the sanitation sector, developing and implementing sanitation solutions. He currently heads the FICO Large Management Unit at Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company, where he's been driving innovative FSM interventions in Lusaka, Zambia. Pride, you're also most welcome to this panel. We next have Richard Cheriot, who is the Acting Chief Executive Officer at the Water Services Regulatory Board, that's WASWEB in short, in Kenya. He has over 23 years of experience in the management of water services, encompassing policy development, regulation, and operations, with a particular emphasis on regulatory compliance. His expertise specifically focuses on the development and monitoring of adherence to the regulatory framework within the water sector. You're most welcome, Richard. And then last but not least, we have Jay Bagwan, who is the Executive Manager at the South African Water Research Commission, WRC in short, where he leads the water use, water resources, and sanitation features portfolio. He has been instrumental in advancing research, innovation, and policy on water supply, wastewater, and sanitation, including shaping South Africa's national water legislation. His work spans technology development, innovation uptake, and the future of sanitation systems. Okay, you're most welcome. Please wave to the participants. So let's begin without further ado to our first panelist, and that is Priscilla. So Priscilla, we have, Sam has made the case for the integration of sewered services and non-sewered services mandates within utilities. And gone on to even mention that this is something that Mawasco has done, which is the utility work with. At Mawasco, you've set up and staffed a new sanitation unit. Can you tell us about the thinking behind this restructuring and the skill sets you brought into the unit? Also, if there is time, you can tell us whether establishing a dedicated sanitation unit is something you would recommend for other utilities. Please, I will emphasize that you have 3 minutes to respond to this. Over to you, Priscilla.
Thank you very much, Alan, and I'm happy again to contribute to this dialogue and this discussion, which is very key for us as utility, service providers. For many years, utilities in Kenya, we have been doing very well in water service provision, but many of us have been shying into getting into non-sewered sanitation for the reasons that, one, we may not be having the resources to develop the necessary infrastructure, capacity is lacking, and we've had that, and the private sector has been doing this very well. So Malindi is 100% reliant on non-sewered sanitation because we don't have an inch of sewer and the services have been offered by the private sector. But now here we are as a utility with a responsibility to offer this service. So where do we begin? We are happy that we were able to push through that as a utility. We don't just form a unit, but we form an entire department with a manager. The reasons that if this unit is anchored in any other department, which is sanitation may not be seen as a core mandate. And for many years, utilities look at water as a main thing, and a lot of investments has gone into water service provision, but very little in sanitation. So we split the technical department into two, one with a focus on water service provision and another one with no resources, no staff, nothing, but an entire department. And we started with a desk. So we started by, first of all, mapping our area and seeing what are the needs, what needs to be done, what are the problems. And then we shortlisted all the problems and came up with solutions. We started mapping our stakeholders, and they gave us a lot of insights, including the private sector. So what we did is when we did the department, we started by doing a citywide inclusive sanitation plan. And we did, what needs to be done for both sewered and non-sewered. But we looked at sewered required a lot of resources, but non-sewered we could do something already and start, transforming lives and changing the metrics. So we did our sheet flow diagram and realized that we have about 25% of safely managed sanitation. And now started speaking to our partners, World Bank, who are in. I've seen World Bank also represented here, WhatsApp, Sanivation, USAID, and all others. We had very many partners whom we brought on board, including the residents associations, the private sector, these are the MTs, the manual PTMTs, and everyone else. And they started giving us solutions and what we needed to do. So what we were able to do is that in our strategic plan, we were able to do an entire key result area on sanitation with clear objectives and indicators on what needs to be achieved. The next step was to push for budgets. It was very difficult to push through a budget because, when water brings revenue, but what does sanitation bring in? And I think Richard will be talking about the sanitation levy, which we are hoping to develop so that even as a department, you can see that we are contributing to the revenue stream of the organization. So what we did by doing all that, we've been able to speak to very many partners and stakeholders and, assure them that we have a home for their funds towards sanitation so that we ensure that sanitation, there's an entire accountability, there's visibility and, good resource allocation and utilization within the utility. So we've been able to bring a lot of skill sets. We're able to understand what technology is required, what solutions are there, how we can guide even the private sector on how they can continue doing this mandate. And we've been able to do investments. For example, we are constructing a fecal sludge treatment plant. We've done containment. We've been able to support technology showcase for the private sector. So we've been able to bring in a lot of issues and work very well in collaboration with the public health. So is this something utilities should do? Yes, they need to do that. But I'll give a caution that needs to be, to be very strong, anchored on very strong leadership, finance allocation, and ensuring that we have very strong partnerships to support this work. So that's the only way to go. And I would really actually encourage other countries wishing to, have transformation in the non-sewered sector to have an entire department or even a unit or a desk or even a person to push this agenda through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Priscilla, for really outlining how we've gone about integrating the sanitation unit on its own from humble beginnings, but to really going through the planning. And I like that last statement of, yes, it's something you'd recommend to the other utilities. So that leads us very nicely to the next panelist, and that is Pride from Lusaka. Pride, we've just had that mandating the utility to provide NSS services does not necessarily mean that it should be done by the utility. And this is something that Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company has done through the coordination and oversight of private sector providers. Could you tell us about how the Lusaka Water and Sanitation Company has structured this engagement with the private sector, and how this delivery model has evolved over time?
Thank you, Alan, for that question, and happy to be part of this dialogue. Yes, so Lusaka Water has been providing non-sewered sanitation services in partnership with the private operators and also the community-based enterprises. And the service delivery models have evolved for some time now, starting in 2013, when there was early recognition that fecal sludge management was a solution for the low-income areas. So between 2013 and 2018, we implemented the delegated service model, where we delegated the entire sanitation service chain to the community-based enterprises. So this was a pilot intervention, and it covered two peri-urban areas. So as Lusaka Water, we provided technical support to ensure that successful implementation of the pilot intervention. So with the lessons from the dedicated service model, we transitioned to performance-based contracts with subsidy model. So from 2019 to 2023. So the subsidy came in to develop the pit latrine market, as well as to address the affordability challenges in the low-income areas. So we created service zones in the city, and we contracted the private operators and community-based enterprises through tendering. So under this stage, we're expanding the services from coverage of two peri-urban areas to all the 35 peri-urban areas in Lusaka. So the service providers under this model were the contracted private operators and also the community-based enterprises. So the households on pit latrines paid subsidized fees to the operators, and the payments to the operators in terms of the incentive was linked to the performance of the operator based on the volumes of the sludge they safely deliver at the treatment plant. So as the Lusaka Water, we were monitoring the desludging operations to ensure that the operators adhere to the contract conditions, and also we verified the payments to the operators. So this is how the whole model was structured. Then from 2024, we transitioned to the utility operation model, because the performance-based contract was more project focused. So we transitioned to the permitting model where we are issuing operational permits for emptying and transportation to all the dislodging operators in the city. So in this stage, we want to mature the service, and the coverage is citywide. So it's not only the peri-urban areas, but also we are including other areas on various on-site sanitation facilities, including the septic tank market. So the service providers under these models are the permitted service providers. So under this phase, we're also strengthening the service delivery through incorporation of the scheduled dislodging, which we are currently piloting. So under this stage, Lusaka will be monitoring and regulating the dislodging operations for the permitted service providers. So this is how the service delivery model is structured and has evolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Pride, for really elaborating how you worked with the private sector and how you've really structured the partnerships with the private sector and demonstrated the model of how to institutionalize or how to adopt NSS in utilities, from piloting to where you are right now with a real institutionalized system. Thank you very much for that, Pride. We will now go on to the next panelists from WASREB. And Richard, we know that the biggest obstacles for non-sewered sanitation, but we can also say sanitation in general, are the institutions and the financing, and that Kenya has made some significant strides in both aspects. WASREB has introduced or supported the introduction of a new sanitation development fee, which is now being piloted with utilities in Kenya. What do you see as the potential of this finance mechanism for supporting utilities to deliver NSS? And if you still have time, you can tell us what have been the challenges to introduce this fee and how these are being addressed. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Alan. And as WASREB, we're also very happy to be part of this dialogue this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Really, from the previous presenters, it's very clear that, and looking at the numbers, and I think Hezekiah quite painted this very clearly in terms of where we stand with respect to access to sanitation services in a majority of the sub-Saharan countries. On that basis, then, it's not just about, is there a place for non-sewered sanitation services, but just about how do we then really ensure that we support the actors along the sanitation value chain to ensure that really we address the challenges around the non-sewered sanitation services. I think from what you've said, and you've quite captured this very clearly, to be able to roll out non-sewered sanitation services, a number of factors really have to come into play. And I think critical is the issue of the enabling environment, and Sam has quite spoken to this, the need for a clear policy, the need for a clear legal framework, and of course, with the legal framework then comes the issue of clarity of mandates for the utilities. And to go with that, of course, then comes the issue of how do we finance once the mandate is clearly outlined. We have made some good strides as Kenya to this end, and I can quite confidently say we have a very facilitative legal framework, and that's why Priscilla could actually clearly outline what Malindi Water has done with respect to addressing the issues of non-sewered sanitation. I will also mention that we're in the process of finalizing our sanitation management policy. Of course, in the hierarchy of things, we should have actually done the policy much earlier than the law, but nevertheless, we are working on the policy. Maybe Patrick, just to the slide before. So the sanitation development fee is just one of the initiatives that we are putting in place as a regulator to facilitate really the water service providers be able to advance access to sanitation services. The provision of this fee or levy is actually within the law, and we've now had that the law that facilitates independent regulation in this country for more than 20 years. And so it's really taken us quite a bit of time to be able to operationalize that piece of provision in the law. And the way WASREP looks at this is looking at the numbers in terms of access to sanitation services. Seaward sanitation access has been declining over time. And that's why I quite agree with Sekai when he says that we now need to look at non-sewer sanitation services as adequate access to sanitation services once you address the inherent challenges that are faced by a number of utilities. So the sanitation development fee is a fee to be charged by the water service providers. We have currently agreed, as we pilot this, that it will be at 5% of the water bill. And this will be set aside by the water service providers to assist in advancing access, both in terms of CAPEX and OPEX in respect of non-sewered sanitation services. So the utilities would then be expected to, as they make proposals to the regulator in terms of their financing options, to include, a projection in terms of the revenue streams that they would actually be getting from implementation of the sanitation development fee. And out of that projection, then be able to say where this financing would be applied. And so for us as WASREP, we see this as a very dedicated revenue stream, notwithstanding the fact that it's still growing. If you look at our projections for now, 5% of utility turnover is not so much, but we believe that having a dedicated revenue stream to address non-sewered sanitation issues is really a first step in terms of really advancing the non-sewered sanitation agenda. We also see the fact that, and when we did a willingness to pay by the consumers, it was very clear that, consumers with access to water services, with access to sewer services were actually willing to make a contribution financing access to sanitation services. And so that cross-subsidy in itself will really help in terms of improving access to sanitation services. It's very clear, and I'm happy that Priscilla has quite spoken to the issue of, they're in the process of making an application to for this sanitation development fee. And we see this as a catalyst for utilities where really access to sewerage services is still very low, that they now begin to have a shift and look at, how can they then advance access to non-sewered sanitation services. And for us, I see, SDF as really an avenue for doing this. It's also an avenue for utilities to leverage on co-financing, because within that framework, then if they're able to, implement activities that are earmarked in the sanitation development fee, then they can actually leverage on those activities for other financing mechanisms. And we are highlighting, for example, the climate finance as an option to this. We're also looking at this as and I've mentioned this, that implementation of the sanitation development fee.
I'm going to ask you to conclude.
Yeah, implementation of the sanitation development fee will really improve on public health, and I don't need to mention that hopefully then that this will lead us to realizing our target to under SDG 6.2. Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you very much, Richard, and I apologize. We really have run out of time, but it was really engaging to hear how you've gone through the process of participatory process of determining this SDF and really earmarking it, ring-fencing it for sanitation development. Please, for the participants, put your questions in the chat box, and I will be able to address them as the panelists. And so we come to our final panelists, and that is Jay from WRC. Jay, I think you at the vanguard of research and innovation know that this is critical for scaling NSS. And you've had all these presentations that have been made. Could you just share two quick reflections, if you may, and under 3 minutes, please, on the way forward for innovation and research in NSS? Thank you.
Yeah, look, to start off with is that, as a sector, we need to start defining NSS more clearly. Otherwise, I see we're getting very locked into the understanding of NSS, and there's a good side and a bad side to it. One is that, when we started visioning this new sanitation disruption and innovation, it came from the back of all the aspects that people have been talking about, that, non-sewered sanitation exists, in the developing world. But, it was an invisible convenience for many administrations. So we unlocked that, through the fecal sludge management kind of drive. But we always saw fecal sludge management as an interim solution while we reinvented the toilet, okay? And somewhere we're getting locked into fecal sludge management as the solution. It, on the long term, can become a very unsustainable, solution because, of the costs, etc. The ultimate is to develop this innovative pathway for non-sewered sanitation, where we invent the toilet that brings dignity, okay, that changes behavior, that now we talk about is climate resilient and water efficient, okay, that opens up the new market for sanitation, but like I said, disrupts. And in South Africa and the WRC, we chose that pathway, and we now transitioning to this pathway around water efficient sanitation solutions, where we're trying to build a toilet facility, okay, that comes with all the aspects that have been mentioned, that it's a good technology, it's an aspirational technology that doesn't produce human waste, it produces byproducts, that it opens up a market for the public and private sector and for consumers, that we are able to innovate and create good governance mechanisms and regulation and enabling environment for it. But of course, also driving the costs and making technology products and the services affordable to many in the world, that they can access it. But behind that is, you need a big industrial push for manufacturing, for parts, for services, for all that stuff. But within that, to continue to push the boundaries of science and knowledge. So in this innovation pathway, we know that, to treat human waste now, we need to shift in the direction away from the paradigms we've come from, where our administrations have been built. So the whole institutional model in the developing world have been built around, waterborne sanitation systems. And it hasn't transitioned. I mean, if you even look in my own country and the rest of the developing world, the administrations don't organize themselves to serve the biggest market they have to deal with. They're still very waterborne orientated. People's, employment still calls them wastewater engineers trying to do, non-sewered sanitation systems. So there's a whole shift that is required when we talk about innovation from technology, from institution, and we using this paradigm, from moving from the citywide sanitation planning ideology to a sanitation sensitive designing environment that encapsulates this new pathway for sanitation where it moves from a municipal managed paradigm to a municipal enabled paradigm, where we know for a fact that the public driven model will not be able to sustain and finance and operate a very decentralized modality for sanitation. So we need to bring in the industry and drive an industry driven model. And I think conceptually, this is the direction we're going, with the kind of pathways that, we transition, that fecal sludge management is seen as an interim while we bring, the novel technology and solutions that builds this new pathway around what we're now calling water efficient sanitation solution, where NSS forms a key part of that pathway through technology and innovation.
Thank you, Jay, for that submission and for keeping to time. That was excellent, actually. But more importantly, for sharing your innovation pathways from your experience in South Africa, not only in technology, but also on the governance side and enabling system, and on the wider ecosystem that includes the private sector and industrialists. I think these are very clear examples from our panelists on how NSS can be adopted by utilities. Would have loved to hear some questions from the audience, but in the interest of time, please note them into the chat. We'll respond to them. And I think the organizers will also share with us the responses after this meeting. I will now hand over to Francois to handle the next session of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan, for this, and thanks to everyone. Excellent presentations, and really very motivating to hear all this. And so I'm going to go trying to make a synthesis of everything that has been mentioned so far. But let me start with what actually Pierre said at the beginning. Non-sewered sanitation is not a lower service. I think this is a very, very key message that we in the sector, we need to really address and make it loud and clear. It's not about a transition. It's not about, like also, I think Keith was saying that we need to revise the sanitation ladder. We need to really rethink how we consider the non-sewered sanitation, knowing that 84%, and that is really not many people had that figure right in the poll, that 84% relies on non-sewered people in Africa rely on non-sewered sanitation. So that is really quite an important point to consider. So now, given this, we do realize there's a transitional shift. There's a transitional shift that we can see, looking at adequate housing, not only in terms of electricity or water, but equally on sanitation, not only, like also Jay just mentioned, looking at on waterborne service delivery systems, but also looking at water efficient systems, many other systems being sanitation sensitive. Technologies that we really need to revise the way we look at it, and the way we actually trained in our universities and concept of sanitation delivery. But transitional shift also in terms of policies, regulations, but there I must really make really clear that policies being developed is fine, but they need to be implemented. They need to be close to the realities in a dialogue, and to be very much engaged with what is happening at the field level. So we need policies, but they need to be implemented, and they need to be much more relevant to the field reality. Transitional shift as well. We do realize that utilities are much more now averse of being involved in terms of roles and responsibilities. This is again going gradually. But what we have noticed, and I think today was really very clear, utilities alone will need to work also with private sectors. And this is really, and private sector used to be, the big word, but we see very practically pit emptying services, which can be small enterprises, which can be also community-based managed organizations. And they're taking a very, very important role. And this is really something that we need to see. But looking at the full chain, because one thing which we would need to realize, roles and responsibilities, contractual arrangements, fees, it's fine, but we need the legal search to be actually at the end of the day treated or managed in a way that is safe. I must say as well that we were quite moved, Priscilla, by your presentation on how you went from zero building from scratch in a place where there's 100% non-sewered sanitation coverage, which really was indeed important. And also from Lusaka and also from Wasrep and Jay, how you actually say, yes, we can. Not saying, this political statement that we had a few years back across the Atlantic Ocean, but really, yes, we can. And we need strong leadership, we need strong partnership, we need strong finance, and of course, we need to go ahead with the fee system that is being introduced gradually. 5% of the water bill is quite interesting. I'm going to stop here saying thank you very much. I'm going to leave it also to our colleague from UN Habitat, Cecilia. But I need to really tell you, 3 minutes will be finished. So please stay with us another 2-3 minutes. We have the Bangkok conference happening in December. Please stay tuned for that. We will have also the Seawise Network, Africa CNAS Network, being really very much involved in this dialogue. We will have another one coming up on the sanitation crisis. So please stay tuned. We'll have another webinar, another dialogue on the sanitation crisis. So over to you now, Cecilia, and thanks a lot for your participation and contributions.
Thanks a lot, Francois, and I think it's been such an interesting exchange, and what was also really exciting was to actually see how we have local government, we have community-based organizations, we have the utility companies coming together, we have the residents associations, and I think that is really what it's all about. It's about the partnerships and bringing everybody together. And I think this is what this session has also shown with all the different partners that have contributed, the speakers. I think it's really about being able to ensure that, we actually put non-sewered sanitation right at the center. It's really the dominant model for Africa as we move forward. With that, of course, policy regulation is absolutely critical to be able to then define the roles and responsibilities of each of the different partners and stakeholders in taking that forward. I thought it was really exciting about hearing about the institutional change which is slowly taking place. And thank you very much to Malindi and Lusaka for actually providing some really interesting examples of how that could take place. And, what are those business models that could actually be adopted? That integration with housing in that first session was also really critical. We can't separate housing and sanitation. They're really inseparable, and of course the role of private sector is also absolutely critical. And we also heard some really exciting ways of how private sector can be integrated in an innovative way in being able to provide those services, and then of course financing and partnerships. So overall message, I think, is really that, this is a solution for Africa. It's about trying to scale that up. To be able to scale it up, we need the policy, the reforms, the strong utilities, the cross-sectoral integration, innovating financing, partnerships, and, these connections with private sector, with communities, and together with government. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody for joining. It's really been a fabulous opportunity to learn, to share and exchange, and I hope that this is just going to continue. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you to all the panelists. Just want to re-echo that from the different segments for the great moderation by the different moderators. I would like to now, and also definitely for our audience, you've been quite engaged. You've received so many questions in the Q&A box, and our panelists have tried to address most of the questions, but the ones that are pending will be addressed, and then we'll share with all the other materials for the dialogue in the next week, 1 to 2 weeks. All this information, all these materials for the dialogue will be shared on our website. All right, and so I would like to just take this opportunity to invite Shobana to just give us an update of what's coming up from JUOPA in just 1 minute. Shobana, please. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Florence. I really take a lot of pleasure in inviting all of you to the 6th Global Water Operator Partnerships Congress. We're looking at several utilities coming together and discussing partnerships in water and sanitation. And we'll have different themes, that is human rights, innovation and digitalization, and climate. And how do we enable water and sanitation operator partnerships that Cecilia had mentioned in the beginning. And we're also having a call for partnerships under the EU WAP program that can be seen on our website. So looking forward to more partnerships among water and sanitation operators and peer learning. Thank you. Thanks. Over to you, Florence.
All right. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to that. And also, this was mentioned by Francois, but just to re-echo, we have the IWA Congress, the Development Congress, Water and Development Congress and Exhibition that will be in Bangkok, Thailand from the 8th to 12th of December. Please join us and let's continue these conversations and many more on other thematic areas. We also have some other webinars that are coming up. We have one on policy, the power of policy, that is nature-based solutions for water security, but also we have one on the contributions of women in the water industry, that focusing on the Middle East region perspectives. Yes, and then we also like to invite you to join IWA. If you're not yet a member of IWA, please, you could take this opportunity. You could scan this QR code, and we have a 20% discount. And so you could use this opportunity. This is valid until the 31st of December. So would love for you to join IWA and become a member, and also enjoy all the other benefits of becoming a member. And once again, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate this, and let's continue with these conversations. Really, these were very critical conversations we had today, and thank you so much for your contribution, everybody. Till next time, yeah, thank you so much.